Hey, how are ya?
I'm good, I think. I don't know. Can you be good and bad at the same moment?
Is that ambivalent? Ambivalent means two things at the same time, right?
Ooh, yeah. I'm ambivalent.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I'm an ambi-feeler.
Yes. What
I
ambies are you feeling?
I'm feeling the excitement of having gone on vacation and
Mm.
then the dread of coming home to all the other things that I stress about in life. Not the least of which is the fact that I just had to put my car in the shop because it developed some weird, violent rattle all of a sudden, and I really don't know what's going on.
Oh, that's lovely.
I know, isn't that great? I had a great vacation, thank you.
So, how long were you home before your car started acting up?
So Shelly and I had to leave the beach at different times, and she got all the way to town with my car. I was still at the beach, and so I was probably, yeah, no, I was still at the beach, and she called me and said, your car's acting up. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make it back to our house from being in town. And there you go. So
Ugh.
I didn't even make it home.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that is my ambi feeling for the day. How are you?
I am doing okay. I have to think about this. The summer has been slow for coaching,
So
and
I just have to interrupt. This is like the easiest question we have on our podcast. How are you? And both of us struggled to answer.
well, but I think this is in part because, when I think about friendship, one of the marks of friendship is people I answer honestly with,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
you know? I mean, I could say, oh, I'm fine. But the fact of the matter is, I've been fine some days and I've been kind of meh, not so great other days. Um, and we don't practice verbalizing that all the time.
Hmm.
And so I think it does take time to think. Not that how you answer the question, how are you, needs to be overthought, but if anybody can overthink it, it's me.
All right. Well, proceed with your overthinking the very simple question. How are you?
Oh, so I am, yes, I coaching has been slow. And so I've wrestled with what direction to be going. Do I make coaching my primary thing? Do I make coaching a side thing and get a different job? I've been in the process of applying for some jobs that seem like they would be really good fits. And every time I interview for a job, I get super excited about it. And it's just been this sort of roller coaster of unsettledness.
Hmm.
So I guess that's where I'm living on a roller coaster of unsettledness.
That's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable.
And I'm not in your position, but I've been in similar positions.
Hmm.
My experience is that is more uncomfortable the longer it goes on.
Yeah, it's a weird in this moment because when I first stepped out of pastoring, I think it took me about 6 months to just decompress. And I wasn't really trying to get a job. And then I was working on the associate leadership stuff and having some really good successes there. And that's what was really good. And so I don't feel like I've been in this part of the process very long.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah. I do know every time my daughter asked me why I don't just apply for a ton of jobs. And in part, I have applied for a ton of jobs. But one reason is because when I get engaged in the process of applying and interviewing for a particular job, I get insanely excited about it. And then I'm like crushed when I don't get it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's not good for me to go through that too many times. I need like a breathing space in between times.
Uh, for sure. For sure. Well, how about I lighten the mood and introduce the seven deadly sins?
Ooh, yes. This is in the vein of which of these do you want to practice this week?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what we're
Ooh.
committed to on this show. No, so in the sense that Dean, bingo, uh,
Hello, Dean.
Dean is in the middle of a sermon series on the seven deadly sins. And he asked me to preach. And so I landed in the middle of this series. And he's like, could you just take the next one in the series? And by the way, that's a sermon on anger or wrath. So I'm literally, as soon as you and I are done recording here, I'm going to sit down and write that sermon. So I've been preparing for that. I don't necessarily want to talk about anger in particular, though we can. I am actually really intrigued by the seven deadly sins as a whole. Because to me, I don't know, the way this has struck me has been, wow, this is kind of old theology. And I mean that in two senses. One, we don't talk about this much anymore. So this feels like a past generation that may have talked about this, or maybe even before. But then also, this has been a concept within the church since its inception. We have talked about the seven deadly sins forever. So it's got historical roots, but then it also just doesn't feel modern because I don't feel like we're talking about it much. And if I just list, I imagine our listeners need me to list the seven deadly sins. I don't know that any of us could just name them.
No, I'll be honest. I was sitting here thinking, I hope he doesn't ask me to name them because I don't know that I can.
I
I
couldn't
think
either.
I bet I'd get 4 out of 7.
All right, go ahead and try now.
Let's
I
see.
wasn't going to put you on the spot, but
Okay. So you already said wrath, so I get a freebie.
yes. All
Anger
right.
slash wrath is one. Uh, greed,
Yes.
lust,
Yes.
lying or deceit.
No.
Ooh, okay. So lying
One
is
X.
allowed. Yeah. What do I get? 3 X's on this?
Yeah, we're Family Feud style.
Okay. Survey says. Um, you know, so we've got anger, greed, lust. Um,
All right, let me put you out of your misery here.
yeah, I don't know.
So pride.
Oh, of course.
Yep. So pride, greed, wrath, envy,
Envy.
lust, gluttony, and
Mm-hmm.
sloth.
Mm.
So again, even the words we have for these, we haven't modernized them, right? Sloth. Do we really talk about being slothful? So,
Well, it's just laziness, right?
well,
I mean, that's our modern
sure,
word for that.
it is, but Dean had a really good sermon on sloth that I listened to because as he defined it, sloth is not just being lazy and not doing anything. Sloth is being distracted from the good things. Like you can be and this is where we fit into this as a society so much. We are distracted by a lot of things. We are constantly doing something. Very little of it has to be done or is worthwhile. And like, here's a meme that I saw that perfectly captures this. Netflix needs to stop asking if I'm still watching and ask me if I have put my clothes in the dryer yet.
That's
And
great.
right? And so that's the idea of like, I'm constantly in motion. I'm constantly doing something, but I'm not doing the things that I should be doing. And so sloth is just not doing the things that need to be done, whether that's through laziness or constant distraction.
Yeah. Well, and I'm struck by just on the surface how many of these you could use in the generic sentence fill in the blank and social media, pride and social media, envy and social media, gluttony and social media,
Lust and social
lust
media.
and social media,
Sloth. And social
sloth
media.
and social media.
Yeah, and not to say social media is the bad thing in the world, but it is emblematic of our world, and it's amazing how relevant all of these are, but we're not talking about it.
Well, and I think what social media does is it preys on our baser nature.
Yeah.
Um, but which brings me back to the point that I think you're making, which is we're not talking about vice.
Right. But here's what we are talking about as a society. Love, tolerance, respect, civility. Those are the things that we talk about. And in fact, we have boiled down all of morality into love, tolerance, and civility. And not that we're even practicing that well, but I'm saying, like, if we talk about morality at all, we're saying it boils down to those things. Do you love people? Are you civil to them? And are you tolerant of their views, even if they disagree from yours? That's it. Those are the only moral things we talk about as a society. And to be honest, pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, sloth, these are all incredibly relevant, and we're not talking about them.
Well, you said we're not talking about them. What is the arena of discourse in which you think these things could be talked about?
That is a very good question. I don't think that we as the church have made these a prominent feature of what we expect of people. And I think we as a church, like a very large, broad umbrella term for all of us, sometimes even celebrate some of these things that we should be avoiding. Things like envy and gluttony and pride. We see a lot of those things in the leaders that we elevate or gravitate toward. And so we as a church have not done a good job of addressing, even among ourselves, these 7 deadly sins. And then consequently, we don't necessarily show up in the world and be an example or a witness to Christ with these virtues intact. And I think that's problematic.
Yeah, I am intrigued because I think that generally speaking, in the American world today, if we showed up with an authentic, character driven stance, driven by an opposition to greed and pride and envy, I think the world would respect us for that. Like I think
Yeah.
there are talking points there because I think there are a lot of people in the world who are getting very sick of the internal decay of a world that is infested with envy and pride and gluttony and sloth.
I completely agree, but I'm wondering from your perspective, where does this fit in? Because we talked about in a prior episode on Psalm 84, which I just thought was such a great conversation. But in our conversation about Psalm 84, we talked about how Eugene Peterson retranslates this word upright or uprightness or righteousness. And he changes it to traveling companion with God. And we were both drawn to that because it brought out some of the wistfulness, some of the desirability about following God, and left behind some of the moralizing and the unhelpful emphasis on the relationship between me and the law. So I would say, hold that in one hand. How would you hold the 7 deadly sins and the need to avoid them in the other hand?
And I'm appreciative of this because I think what comes to mind as I think about these things is, let's take an example. Can we, without too much debate, agree that the opposite of pride is humility?
Yeah,
Is that, can we just go with that?
that'll work for me.
All right, perfect. I think what we're really talking about here is not making the mistake of saying, I am humble, you are prideful, you should be more like me. That's the danger that actually becomes prideful in its pursuit of humility. I think the way this becomes inspiring and captivating is to say, I aspire to walk away from pride. I aspire to walk towards humility, and I would invite you to be on that journey with me.
Hmm.
Right? The
Yeah.
virtue isn't me and my behavior. The virtue is the virtue, and I am pursuing it. And you can pursue it with me if you'd like.
Yeah, I like that invitation model, but I also like the which direction are we going kind of idea. And I almost think about it almost on a number line, if you will, right? You're either going up in the numbers or you're going down in the numbers. And that just is what it is. You're on this horizontal plane. And on one side is pride, and on the other side is humility. And you can frame this as don't be prideful, don't be prideful, don't be prideful. But sometimes I think what we end up doing is standing somewhere on the number line, looking over at pride and saying, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Meanwhile, we haven't moved.
Yeah.
And so we need to actually turn around on the number line and turn our back on pride and look at humility and say, oh, that's the opposite. Well, then I'm going to go that way and start moving up the number line rather than just getting stalled by looking at the negative side of the line and saying, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that.
Well, and think about this. This catches my mind in two arenas. First of all, I think you just described repentance.
Yes, I did.
And I think you described it beautifully. Because if we are going to turn our backs on pride, who and what does that mean I need to disengage from? Who and what do I need to stop celebrating? There are people in our world I cannot celebrate if I am turning my back on pride.
Hmm.
There are people, places, and organizations I can't stand with if I'm turning my back on envy. There are people and places and cultural things that we hold on to I can't participate in if I'm turning my back on gluttony. Right? Like, this isn't just a philosophical thing for me. Putting the turning your back language into it makes it so practical to me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to celebrate that. I turn my back on that.
Which, that's so fascinating. That language that you just used, I'm not going to celebrate that. I turn my back on that. There is a tendency in our society to say anything you say no to automatically makes you, I don't know. What did I say at the beginning of the episode? What is the one thing that we talk about as a society? You have to be loving and you have to be tolerant and you have to treat people with civility. And there is a belief in our culture that to say no to something as a moral category and to say, I'm not going to celebrate that, I turn my back on that, feels in our society like a violation of being loving, tolerant, and treating people with civility.
Well, and one of the things I'm struck by here, we as a church take a strong stance on certain issues, like homosexuality or abortion.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating to me is that those of us, frequently the men in charge in the church, who take this stand are not tempted towards homosexuality have no capacity to actually commit abortion. And so we are railing against these things while the seven deadly sins we're silent on.
Mm.
And potentially jokingly permissive of.
Yeah. Right? Gluttony and sloth. I mean, how many men's retreats center around extensive amounts of grilled meat?
Absolutely.
And not that like eating grilled meat is a bad thing. I'm not like, I'm
Oh,
not being overly legalistic here, but if you talk about jokingly dismissive of gluttony, well, that might actually happen sometimes there.
absolutely. And so many of these things happen. Pride, there has to be a measurable quantity. How many pictures of yourself are you going to post on social media before we all know you're prideful?
Yeah. I don't know what
And
that number
yet
is,
you're
but
going to
it
throw
exists.
everybody under the bus who does these other things.
Yeah. So I think this is where this is, as I said before, old theology, if you will, but still incredibly relevant theology.
Mm.
And I guess what I'm wondering is, in light of the seven deadly sins and their opposite virtues, how would it change how we showed up in the world if we started taking these seriously again?
Well, you mentioned their opposites. Are we able to suggest that the fruit of the Spirit is the opposite of the seven deadly sins? Is that safe? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control? Are those, is that the opposite? Are those the virtues? Or is there a different list of virtues somewhere?
I I'm inclined to say that both the seven deadly sins and the fruits of the spirit are representative
Mm,
lists, and that generally speaking, one is the antithesis of the other. I don't know that
yeah.
we could just go down the list and make a one for one comparison, or that would even be helpful.
No, and this was one of my points was going to be I think you need to assemble a person or character driven by those vices and a character driven by those fruits of the spirit. Because I fear that if we work with them only as individual things rather than as a composite whole, you could almost worm your way out. Well, I'm not prideful and I'm not really envious and I'm not, and that's, I think there's value in looking at each one individually, but then asking which of these define my character, this list or this list, and I have to pick one.
Well, and I think if you put those lists against one another and asked a more collective question, which of these are we as Christians known by,
Mm-hmm.
right? Are we known for our pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth? Or are we known by our love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control?
Mm.
That that is a revealing question about the church. And yes, we are a part of the church. I'm not trying to step aside from personal morality, but I am trying to not overly individualize scripture and remember that we are a part of a collective here and we have to do our part on behalf of that collective.
I think that you're making a great point. You asked this question, which of these typifies how we show up in the world? And I think this idea of collective morality, collective ethics is really valuable because we as a church, and we're painting with a broad brush, this doesn't mean every Christian in every situation, but the church, is the church more known for showing up with kindness or wrath?
Mm.
when a non-Christian visualizes a Christian leader, do they visualize someone with self-control or someone who's gluttonous?
And here's the danger in asking this question, and I'm facing it even in my head. Yeah, but it's those people's fault for messing it up for the rest of us. You know what I mean? Like, they're still, at the end of the day, there has to be an introspective answer to that, and let me take responsibility for my immediate community and how we collectively show up together, and let me see how I can impact that for the good while I also address my own seated issues.
Yes. And this is where I heard someone this week talking about showing up in the world. They were specifically talking about this in terms of politics, but I think it is true in many contexts. This was, again, I think this was from the Holy Post, and it was just a wonderful discussion that they were having, in which one of the moderators was saying, we think it's showing up when we talk a lot in groups, or when we post stuff on Facebook, or when we make our opinion known about something. That's not showing up in the political realm or anywhere else. You're not being a part of the process. You're not engaging with the world by shouting out your opinions. Even what we are doing here on this podcast isn't really showing up in the world. What's showing up in the world is the way that I personally choose to engage with non-Christians in my community. When you go to work every day, you are engaging with the world. When I work with non-Christian clients as a coach, that's when I'm engaging with the world. And that's when I have to make a choice. And I think this is where it's important to recognize the places where we are known for our failures, not because I need to throw stones at the people who have failed other than me, but because I am not even starting at the starting line there. I may need to work doubly hard as a follower of Jesus in a particular area because of the reputation Christians have. If I want to be known as a kind Christian, I may have to work doubly hard. And I may have to go overboard.
Yeah. No, I feel this so strongly. I was having a conversation with somebody just a few weeks ago, and they have a lot of misconceptions about Christianity and a lot of misconceptions about what I personally believe or what I may have even taught my kids to believe. And it was so sad, at times frustrating for me to know that this person really misunderstood so much. But then at the end of the day, this person also looked at me and said, but I know you are a loving person, which didn't quite square with everything that had been said. But I believed them in that moment that they truly saw me as a loving person. And I thought, okay, so long as you get that, we have a place to start from. And I think that's because this person has a belief that Christians are not loving people. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you almost have to work doubly hard on something just to overcome a perception issue.
Yeah. Well, and I think that part of the work has to be being intentional about, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't have done that in this situation, but not taking personal credit, but giving the church credit. You're a loving person because you're part of the church.
Mm.
Right?
That's interesting. I did
you
not
don't get
give
to
the
make
church
an
credit.
exclusion. What?
I did not give Jesus credit, or I did not give the church credit. I did give Jesus credit in that moment. I didn't think about giving the church credit, but you're exactly right. I mean, that's where it all gets worked out, right? In practical reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if the church gets credit for all the negative situations, part of what we have to do is give it credit for the moments we do the right thing. You know, otherwise the church will always look bad.
True. Well, thanks for diving into this topic. I know the virtues and vices, this is not typical language, or it's probably not going to grab headlines. This is not a clickbait episode, but boy, it really struck me as something that was really important. So I appreciate you diving in with me.
Yeah, I find this fascinating. We'll definitely have to come back to this because I think that it offers us some important language to really reflect on. And I would be curious as we turn to our listeners, I'd love to hear, first of all, before we listed them all, how many of the seven deadly sins could you list?
You just don't want to
So,
feel bad with your 4, 3.
no, I don't care. I'm sure that my wife is on her kayak right now, saying, like, practically hopping up and down, saying, "I got them all. I got them all." Um, and I have no doubt that she's not the only one. Um, but I'm also curious, what does it mean for you, the listener, to show up in the world embracing the opposite of vice, embracing virtue?
Yeah. And as we often say, I mean, community is such a big part of why we do this podcast. And sparking these conversations with a friend, with a community group or whatever, maybe having a good conversation about how can we pursue these things together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, uh, Josh, I guarantee this is not the only thing you've been thinking about, especially we are in the middle of our Summer in the Psalms series. And we've been reading the Psalms together. And if you're listening, we post a reading schedule for the Psalms every Sunday. And we would love to have you join us as we read the Psalms together and try to allow the Psalms to saturate our minds and our hearts. But as you've been reading the Psalms this week, Josh from Oregon, what have you been thinking about?
Yeah, I was struck by the end of Psalm 105. So Psalm 105 recounts, as many Psalms do, the overall narrative arc of God's redemptive history with Israel. And it ends with the Israelites inheriting the promised land. But that is a complicated thing in our society. Sometimes this really throws people, especially because the ongoing raging battles in the Middle East over the Holy Land still affect our news channels today, and people are literally dying or being tortured over this divisive issue. And so when you come to a thing in the Psalms where it says, so this is verse 43. So he brought his people out, which is out of Egypt. So he brought his people out with joy, his chosen ones with singing, and he gave them the lands of the nations, and they took possession of the fruit of the people's toil. I mean, that's very clearly, yeah, I took this land from somebody else. They had toiled for it. You're going to get to take over the gardens that they planted, and this is now your land. And that is such a complicated statement for us. And the thing that I've had to wrestle with and just kind of land on, and it's not fully emotionally resolved, even if I think it is fully theologically resolved. Those two are separate sometimes for me. I think this was God's judgment on a sinful people. He waited. He didn't just give the promised land to the Israelites. He waited for the fullness of their sin to be complete before he ripped it away from these people. So that's how I resolve it theologically. But that's really even strengthened here by the end of the psalm. So it doesn't just end with, all right, God took this land from somebody else and gave it to the Israelites. It says that they may keep his statutes and observe his laws. Praise Yahweh. Psalm over. And it's this, for me, because of my theological conviction as to why God did this, It was not only a gift to his people, it was a punishment for those who had made themselves not his people. This is a very explicit statement to the Israelites. Yeah, this is your land so that you will follow me in this land, so that you will live out my statutes and observe my laws. That was not previously being done in this land. Your turn. This is what I expect. And it's not so that they can relax and have a good time, so that they can be smug and be the chosen ones of God. No, this is your land, and it's so that you can follow my commandments. I found that to be very impactful.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really good. I don't know that I have a lot of things to add, but it certainly gives me something to chew on.
Yeah, fair enough. And obviously a touchy topic too. So,
Yeah.
but what about you? What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about from Psalm 104, there's this long series of verses that really the whole psalm has a lot to do with this. This psalm is a celebration of God's creation. It begins with, He set the earth on its foundation so that it could never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. It moves on. Beside them, the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. Moving on, you cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. He made the moon to mark the seasons, the sun for its time of setting. You made the darkness and the night, the young lions, and on it goes. One of the things that struck me as I think of this as a worship song is that I can easily go out into nature and encounter God. But I'm not sure how often we bring the encounter of God into our worship lyrics in corporate worship. I just don't remember the last time, and I'm not, this isn't a criticism, it's got me thinking. Because certainly there aren't 87 Psalms out of 150 that are about how beautiful creation is. But there are a few. And I think that there is value in our worship repertoire of making sure that we celebrate the beauty and goodness of creation as evidence of the beauty and goodness of the Creator.
Yep. I completely agree.
That's my whole thought.
That's a great thought. It has me thinking actually about the old hymn, How Great Thou Art, because it starts off, O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the works thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. I feel like that's getting at the exact thing that you're talking about. This, I have experienced God in the world, and I'm going to celebrate that in a moment of worship and song.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
All right. It's time.
Yeah, it is.
You ready for a Which Josh question?
I am. Are you ready?
Nope, but we're going to do it anyway.
All right.
Which Josh needs walking lessons?
And this is me. I briefly lost my capacity to walk this week.
Oh my goodness. I don't know the full story here, but I am picturing the School of the Silly Walk that Monty Python did. Have you seen that sketch?
Ministry of the Silly Walk.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm picturing that like all of a sudden you can't walk normally anymore and you have to walk in all the ways that John Cleese walked in that skit.
It wasn't that. John Cleese did not show up in this moment.
Okay. All right. This is a Cleeseless example.
But I woke up a couple of nights ago in the middle of the night, and I wake up almost every night in the middle of the night, so that's not anything unusual. I got up. I took less than one step completely lost my sense of equilibrium and fell over. Like, I didn't trip on anything. There was nothing on the ground. I just fell over. And I fell like right into, I have this recliner in our bedroom, and right next to it, instead of having like a nice end table, I have one of those like crates you can get at Home Depot.
Okay.
Um, and that's just what I use to put my tea on or whatever. And I fell full-fledged into the crate. And so I have these like giant gashes on my arm and this
Oh,
massive black and blue on my side because I forgot how to walk.
I mean, I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh. You were clearly in pain, but um, ouch. I'm sorry. Let me compose myself here. My sympathies. Is that
Yeah,
better?
I don't know. I think it's hilarious. I don't know what to
Okay,
do
good.
with it.
I don't know
Um,
what to do with it either, except give you walking lessons, evidently.
Apparently, yeah, if anybody knows where I can get a Groupon for a good walking lesson, I would
Groupon.
love that.
I, we don't get fan mail, but the day is going to come where we're going to get fan mail. And you have invited everybody to send me hate mail. I can't remember what the point of that was, but I'm going to get all this hate mail and you're going to get these Groupons for walking lessons.
Oh man, yep, it's true. Oh well. Assuming I don't somehow accidentally kill myself between now and next week, are you on for us to talk then?
Yeah, let's talk while you're in traction. I don't care. Let's talk.
All right, we'll do it. Talk to you then.
Okay. All right.
Bye.